Rohit Kandai and Brother Takuma Ogunse. So I'm going to hand you over immediately to Dr. David Hines so that he can read the press release. Dr. Hines. Not hearing you, David.
I did. Yes, sorry. Good morning to the media and to the public on social media and other platforms that are following this press conference. As the country awaits the reading and debate of Guyana's 2025 national budget, WPA feels it is opportune to raise what we consider to be some serious attendant issues. The first issue relates to the fact that this year's budget is more likely than not to be a typical election year budget. In that regard, it would not be surprising if the government's budget prioritizes, if what the government budget prioritizes are in line with the PPP's intention to remain in government at all costs. In fact, given the focus of previous budgets by the current government, WPA fears that this 2025 budget would continue the government's stated view that its budgets are an extension of the PPP's election manifesto. While WPA fully understands the temptation to use the national budget as an electioneering tool, we warn that any budget which is driven solely or largely by partisan considerations cannot be considered national in nature. In fact, WPA thinks that one of the impediments to socio-economic development since the coming of oil has been the tendency of the government to treat the country's resources as its partisan property and the management of those resources as the purview of the government and the government alone. This brings us to the second issue we wish to highlight today, and that is the lack of broad-based consultation and input into the preparation of the budget. According to Vice President Jack Dew, the government held consultations with communities. WPA asked when and where were these consultations held? Were these consultations publicly announced? Which government agency or agencies facilitated these consultations? Were the parliamentary opposition parties consulted? Were civil society organizations, in particular trade unions, consulted? WPA notes a recent Kaitro News report. I'm jumping ahead of myself here. The third issue WPA wishes to raise takes us into what we would be looking for in the budget. We do not wish to pass judgment on a budget which we have not read or studied, but there are areas which we intend to pay close attention to. WPA has noted the government's emphasis on infrastructural spending in previous budgets. While we welcome spending in this area, we feel the government has overdone it. There needs to be a more balanced spending approach which reflects multiple priorities and an integrated outlook for the economy. Towards this end, WPA hopes the government reduces the emphasis on infrastructure and spread the spending allocations more equally across the critical areas of the economy. One such area is poverty alleviation. As is well known, this is an area which the WPA has prioritized as a central plank of our country's developmental trajectory. With a projected poverty rate of approximately 48%, based on a poverty line of $5.50 US dollars, Guyana ranks among countries with the highest rate in Latin America and the Caribbean. While this represents a slight decline over the last decade, WPA feels that this decline could have been more robust had the government systematically prioritized it. We have had cause after each budget to bemoan the government haphazard, lackadaisical approach to this issue. If our country is to become fully developed, it must remove the systemic obstacles to development. Poverty is one such obstacle. The government's belief that poverty can be replaced or can be reduced through unstructured cash grants and open clientelism would plunge the country deeper into the pit of persistent poverty. WPA reminds the nation that its universal basic income proposal, in the form of the Buxton proposal, is a national plan which the government is free to implement. What about budgetary allocations aimed at combating high cost of living? While the government has argued that in previous budgets, it put in place measures to help citizens deal with this existential problem, WPA asks whether those in charge have done any serious review of these measures to determine their impact. From everything we have seen, citizens have a hard time combating the cost of living. This problem needs more robust and pointed government intervention. We would be paying close attention to how the budget deals with this issue. Relatedly, a lot has been said about the government's wages policy or lack thereof. WPA has in the past taken the government to task on this issue. We are yet to discern any clear policy on the part of the government. For example, what outcomes are the government pursuing when it considers the issue of wages in the public sector? WPA is not impressed by the meager increases which the government has shoved down the throat of workers more often than not without any negotiations with the unions. In that regard, WPA will be paying close attention to how the budget addresses this issue. We are on record as supporting a minimum wage of no less than $200,000 per month. In the circumstances and taking into consideration all the related factors, we think this is a reasonable proposal. Our party's policy committee, is in the process of hammering out our more detailed proposals in this regard. Another area which the WPA would be paying close attention to is education. Like poverty, this is a priority area for us. We note the overall increase in budgetary allocations in previous budgets. However, we again question whether the government sees this as a high priority area. What outcomes are they looking for? For the WPA, improve teachers' wages, reduction of illiteracy, curtailing school dropout, research and development in relation to both the oil and non-oil sectors as priority areas. In particular, WPA would be paying close attention to the budgetary allocations for the University of Guyana, which to our mind has not been adequately funded in previous budget. Based on its mandated obligations to foster good governance in Guyana within a people-centered democratic system. WPA had invited the ruling elected authorities to reciprocate and fulfill their obligations. Our origins were for good faith responses from the authorities to, rather than personal abuse of its members and of the public and the political leaders. For example, WPA called for the publication of the due diligence report on car powership, with whom Guyana had struck a deal on emergency power delivery. In evaluating the deal, we came across, as one media house reported, a torrent of corruption allegations and court cases. A due diligence would have discerned these investigations and take note of them. We are asking for the government to release that due diligence report for a second time. On a related issue, WPA lends its voice to a call on the government by other organizations and individuals to release pertinent documents related to the Exim Bank loan for the gas to energy project. This is too important a project to be left to the whims and fancies of the government. The loan is taken out in the name of all Guyanese, and its details, barring security concerns and other necessary confidentialities, should be known to the public. It is ironic that a party and government which pounded the then government for its secrecy relating to the oil contract, if that party is today acting in the same manner. WPA condemns the double standard of the PPP and calls for the immediate release of the necessary documents. We find Vice President Jack Dio's terse dismissal of the reporter's question on the issue to be a typical but ugly display of official arrogance. Telling the reporter to ask Exim Bank for the documents is out of order. WPA wishes to remind Jack Dio that the people of Guyana did not elect Exim Bank to run their affairs. As a party which has been at the receiving end of Vice President Jack Dio's abuse, WPA again raises its voice against this use of high office to routinely abuse leaders and other civil society individuals who the party see as opposed to them. He has taken political discourse to an all-time low. Our country will take decades to overcome the consequences of this assault and on our national psyche. Is this the method of conflict resolution we want to pass on to our children and young people? If much WPA condemns the abuse of individuals, political and other leaders, we note the special nastiness that is meted out to Glenn Lal, own and publisher of Kaitro News. Mr. Lal has the wherewithal to defend himself, but all Guyana should call on Jack Dio to tone down his poison. We are aware that Glenn Lal, like many of us in the public arena, is not without sin in this regard, but that does not jointly unjustify Jack Dio's uncouth behavior. No doubt, Glenn Lal's use of his media empire to hold the government accountable, especially as it relates to oil and gas, rubs the government the wrong way. But this is exactly the major role of the Fourth Estate. End of statement.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hines, for that statement. from the Working People's Alliance. I will first ask Brother Roy Kanai to comment, and then Brother Takuma Ogunse.
Thank you, Brother Chairman. Good morning to everyone. I think the theme of our statement is national unity in an effort to democratize the budget. It should not be used as partisan party propaganda towards an elections. It is important, given our oil resources, that the budget should be agreed to in the main by all political parties. It should have been discussed properly in the National Assembly before being presented, and that process has not been done. We all know a house divided against itself will fall, and thus the plea for national unity, especially in relationship to an oil economy. On the question of the cost of living and poverty alleviation, Dr. Thomas' emphasis on a basic minimum to protect workers in their struggle for the basic necessities of life should take priority. And any budget proposal should make that inclusive under the circumstances of our oil economy. So hopefully the budget we are anticipating should reflect that as a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Kanai, for your brief comments. Brother Takuma? Brother Ogunse?
You hearing me now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you, Brother Chair, and good morning to members of the press and the viewers on the various platforms watching this WPA press conference. Budget and Budget Day historically have been a very important exercise in the nation's life. And it is tragic to see that at present, when we are having these gigantic budgets, the last budget, 2024, was $1.146 trillion. A lot of money. And when I reflect how persons are responding to the budget and comparing it with the earlier days in the 70s, 80s, and even to the late 90s, where Budget Day would have seen hundreds of persons outside the parliament in the individual capacities. Some of them may be coming from trade unions, some from political parties, with their placards, with the various slogans, what they expect from the budget, and how they feel about this important national exercise. We have long lost that kind of popular involvement of the masses, and I think it's an indictment of the political culture that we developed. And I think that in the context of oil, which have transformed the whole political and economic equation, there is need for us to work to get people more involved in paying attention on the national budget and Budget Day, and to come to the parliament, the place where the budget is being read, and to state, and to state and to show their concerns. So we're spending more money, gigantic sums, but we are further and further disconnecting from the masses. And I think that this is a troubling concern for the WPA. This is election year, and the last budget was the largest ever in the history of the country. And we are anticipating that this present budget would far exceed that, and more so since this is election year and you have to plan for elections. So we are anticipating a gigantic budget driven by elections dynamics, and we feel that the country ought to pay careful attention at the way in which these large expenditures will be spent, because it is one thing to pass in Parliament these expenditures, but we are known not to have effective supervision of expenditure by oversight bodies in the Parliament and in the nation as a whole. Our accountability on spending of national funds are very much questionable. And with this super large budget that we will experience, the challenge to monitor and to supervise the spending as the funds are rolled out, in our view, will be a major challenge to the country. The WPA is also concerned that the government seems hell-bent, and especially Vice President Jagdeo, to further degenerate the political culture and to make political discourse something far from being honorable, responsible exchange between contesting political forces and the general population as a whole. Politics is supposed to be one of the highest expressions of a country's culture, and one expects from a country leaders that as they engage in the contest of ideas, it will be done in a respectful and a serious way. And the WPA is not surprised, but we feel it is necessary for us to work and to fight to get the government to be accountable. And we have raised in the whole year a number of issues, and some of them we repeat in this press conference, and we will be repeating in other press conferences to come, calling upon the government to give answers to those things that we demand answers for. We feel that this is important part of the democratic exercise in the country. We cannot give the government an easy pass where the opposition make important observations, raise important questions, and the government feels that it could dismiss those and not pay the kind of correct, not give the correct responses and attention to those matters as a quest has become a normal kind of behavior. And we feel it further degenerate the political culture and also disconnect large sections of the masses from politics, where people see politics not as an honorable and a noble exercise, but the exercise of gangsters. And Jagdeo is the symbol of political gangsterism and the undermining of Guyana's political culture. I stop there.
Thank you very much, Brother Ogun, for your response. We'll now open the meeting to members of the press who have questions. Feel free to indicate whether you want to ask a question, and we'll give you that opportunity. Yes, Ms. Williams, go right ahead. Trina?
Hi, good morning. Trina Williams, Guyana Chronicle. I noticed in your press statement you spoke extensively that we're in election year. So I want to ask, is the WPA going to be forming a coalition with the PNC? Well, APNU, I should say.
We have not gotten to that point yet. It has been reported in the public media that we had an initial meeting with the PNC and have agreed in principle to go together as a coalition. Since then, there have not been any talks. You may have read in the media that the leader of the opposition announced last week that there will soon be a meeting with the WPA, the AFC, and the PNC/APNU. So it's an ongoing process.
Okay, and I'll follow up there. Well, not a follow-up, I should say a separate question. At Mr. Norton's press conference, he would have stated that an opinion poll would have ranked him as the most favored or highest out of the opposition members. Could we see the WPA throwing its support behind Mr. Norton for presidential candidate, or would the WPA be throwing its support behind Nigel Hughes?
We have not seen the poll that the opposition leader has referred to, so we cannot comment on that poll. But more pointedly to your question about who we would support as a possible presidential candidate for the Grand Coalition, if it materializes, when that time comes, if they are contesting candidates, WPA will have to make its judgment at that time. But for now, we are not focused on that. If, as it seems, the supporters of Mr. Norton and Mr. Hughes are pushing a contest between the two, we just have to pay attention to that. But we are not going to make decisions based on that. There may well not even be a contest between the two for the top spot. But no, it's premature for us to answer that question either way.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Williams, for your questions. Any other? Yes, Anasa. Go right ahead.
Good morning. Dr. Hines, you spoke, I believe it was you or Mr. Jacoma that mentioned a lot about poverty in Guyana and the government spending not being spread across the critical sectors. We would have heard a story in the country news saying that the government is adding another US $1.5 billion loan from the Exim Bank. In contrast to ExxonMobil walking away each year without paying millions of dollars in taxes, how does the party view the country's continuously growing debt?
The country's continued what? I didn't get your last word.
Continuously growing debt.
The growing debt. Oh, okay. The growing debt. Yeah. Thank you. Look, the WPA is very concerned, like all Guyanese organizations and Guyanese in general, about the economic direction the country is taking. Once we peel behind the growth in the GDP, once you peel behind that, then you discover challenges that we continue to have. In fact, challenges that are multiplied in the political economy. And so therefore, there must be something that we're not doing correctly in terms of managing the economy. We must agree that as we move into a petro state, we can't manage the economy in the same manner that you would have managed them before. There is always the temptation when so much resources is coming in to the country at the same time to overspend and to not spend on the right things, to go on a spending splurge, etc., etc. WPA feels that given what we are coming out of, a post-plantation society, a post-colonial society, given now we have an opportunity to use oil resources to expand from where we are, including growing the non-oil sector, sectors of the economy, in terms of getting rid of poverty, in terms of upping our education standard and so forth. We feel that there's always a challenge there about what your priority should be, because a lot of those, if not all of those areas, are priorities. So we understand the temptation to try to do everything at the same time. But we feel that we have to be prudent about it. And so, yes, like other organizations and parties, we are concerned about the growth of debt. We are aware that countries all over the world borrow money in anticipation of what they will get. That is how they run economies all over the world. But in an economy like the Guyanese economy, one needs to be very careful about that thesis, because people will point that we are dependent on oil. What happens if the price of oil in the market plunges? We are left with all that money on our hands, etc., etc. So yes, we are concerned about this borrowing binge to suffice a reckless spending binge in Guyana. I don't know if any of my comments want to add anything.
I just want to say, and to join with Dr. Hines in saying that the WPA is very conscious of the need for the government to spend money in order to advance the economy. And we are very conscious of the argument that money spent now is cheaper or have more value now than spent, 10 years or 4 years down the road. So we are conscious of those realities. And I'm making this point because I know Jagdio will invoke it. We're also conscious in our examination that Guyana still have one of the lowest debt payment ratio in the world. And all of that, gives the government room for borrow. But the WPA is of the view that since we have been carrying from time immemorial budgets with large deficits, where our budgets have been outstripping government revenue, that now that we have in oil money, we should be more careful to make sure that our budget deliberately seek to reduce deficit and become more manageable within terms of income and expenditure. And in that, if for no other reason, we believe excessive spending is not in the best interest of the country, even though the country may not immediately have to face the danger of overspending. We think prudency and good economic management should seek to make our national budget come closer with the revenues. Expenditure and revenues should come much more closer, rather than what we have now is the deficit increasing and increasing.
Thank you. Has your question been answered, Ms. Williams? Our response seems like she has, okay. Anasa?
Hi, that's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm asking if you're satisfied with the responses that you got.
I am. Thank you.
Okay. Any other question or further comments?
No, that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay. Does any other member have any other? Any other member of the panel, do you have any other comments that you want to make? I notice, Dr. Hines, this is not part of the release, but it's in the news right now that the word corruption has been banned from the use in Parliament. I don't know if you want to make a comment on that briefly. I find that to be going overboard.
Well, no, I completely agree with you that it's too much. Look, the Parliament of Guyana has become a rubber stamp of the executive. This is unfortunate because we do have what is called a winner-take-all political system. We have what is called a separation of powers. So in theory, we still have separation of powers. But the way in which governments, this government, governments before, have used the National Assembly, one can hardly call the kind of system that we have the most democratic system. How can we be a democratic parliamentary system when the parliament's will is smothered routinely by the executive? And so the speaker, who's a partisan speaker rather than a neutral speaker, in effect gives the ruling party an extra vote. And, you know, you're going to ban the use of the word corruption from the parliament. To prevent what? To prevent people from condemning corruption, official corruption in the country. If you ban it from parliament, they will say it outside of parliament. But it is the use of power because they have the power in their hands and they're using them to cripple democratic government.
I would just want to add that the use of the word corruption have been used in our parliament since the early colonial days. And this is a retrogression. And, you know, and I think that corruption is always an important element in nation building. Every nation throughout the world has had to spend very conscious efforts to examining their societies and the economies and the leaders, whether it's in business or in politics, to see, you know, how this human weakness of corruption affects national interests. And for a country parliament to ban the use of the word corruption, they're not only banning a use of a word, they're really banning a process that is the examination, the objective examination of corruption in the country. The process they're banning, they don't want, what they're saying is that you can't objectively analyze this whole question of corruption because for us, it reflects upon us, the rulers, and we don't want it to be part of the national discourse. So they're not only banning the word, but they're banning a whole process.
Right. Well, the march, we are in a dictatorship, and we are seeing clearly all the signs of that as they're being made manifest daily by the excesses of the administration. I'm hopeful that Manzoor Nadir, I don't know where he got his instructions from, but that he will I mean, when people make these decisions and you carry them out, it reflects upon you because you are the front man. What is your image now in the public sphere and in the world at large? But some folks just are not concerned about that. All they are concerned about possibly is, the position they hold and what they can accrue from that being in that position. But as an individual, you need to take stock of yourself and ask yourself, how does that make me look as an individual in the wider world and in the society in which we live? And we oftentimes do not do that. How can you ban a word like corruption from an institution that is supposed to be focused on dealing with matters related to government's excesses, where corruption is key, and to all that? And the fact is, the fact that they do not want the word is suggesting that they do not want the continued exposure that they've been facing. And like the press release says, we have to continue to, because it's not only against individuals in the parliament, in our highest lawmaking institution, but it's also against people like Glenn Lal, even the WPA, the Walter Rodney Groundings, and all the other agents who have been exposing corruption and other activities that are not right within our society. So everyone now is a target, right? And it's a sad development, but we have to fight against that. I just open for any other comment. If there are none, then I will ask for closing remarks. Brother Roy, you want to say? Yes, sure.
If you can ban corruption and make it vanish, then we might as well use the same process and ban everything that is a problem, and the world will be fundamentally different, or it will remain the same. If you can banish corruption by banishing the word, let's banish poverty, let's banish everything we don't like, and let's see the state of affairs that it will bring into existence. It's comedy at its worst.
That is serious joke you're talking about. Boy, we are in trouble. Brother Dave, Dr. Hines, you want to give some closing comments?
No.
All right, then. Well, if there are no other questions or comments, then we want to thank the media for being with us. I want to thank the panelists at this press conference for being here. And to the people who have been watching online, we're happy to have you. Spread the word about our weekly conference so that more people can join and be informed on what is taking place in Guyana and with the WPA. Thank you very much. Do enjoy the rest of your